Okay, so we begin the notes that are associated with the curriculum. We will spend 2 days on 1.1, so we're going to take first part of notes today. Then when you come back into the classroom, you will take the remaining part of 1.1. Once we finish 1.1, we of course go to 1.2. We finish that, go to 3, go to 4, and that concludes Unit 1. And then we'll take some kind of test, but of course we've got assignments, as we go throughout the notes and projects and so forth. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go through the half of 1.1 notes. So for the remote learner tomorrow, or for today, we'd say this is what you have to view. You need to take notes on this, and when you come in the next day, then you'll be able to pick back and carry through with the rest of 1.1 notes. So there again, please remember this is the notes for the curriculum. So this begins what you need here. So make sure you are taking good notes. We begin the first slide as far as the beginning of colonial America. This is familiar because if you watch the Puritans and Pilgrims lecture and filled out the outline, then all this is relatively familiar. So just to brief here, the beginning of colonial America was during the 16th century. Many people left Europe, predominantly English, and journeyed to North America for many different reasons. Okay, so your most notable reasons are you see here 1 through 4. They disagree with the Church of England due to traces of Catholicism and heavy taxation to support the church. As we said in the Puritan lecture, there again, the Puritan took more of a direct relationship with God, whereas the Catholic denomination, has to look towards a mediator. So they didn't agree with that, and this led to a break from the Church of England, which was, of course, heavily influenced by the Roman Catholic Church. So the first two here are more religious reasons. All right. Second one, to become missionaries to a free world, to establish Christian doctrines. There again, they were looking to go to an undeveloped area that they might be able to easily influence and spread their ideas. So it is safe to say that the major reason or reasons is that of religious reasons. However, that wasn't the only case. Looking at 3 and 4, many people come to colonial America to own land and improve social positions. There again, primogeniture laws was enacted in England during this time period, meaning that if you were not the firstborn, then you didn't receive any inheritance. And so it led people to, have to try to scrap and make a living, who thought that they were going to get, some form of an inheritance and, possibly an established wealth. It didn't work for them. England at this time as well was heavily populated. Land began to become fenced, if you will. So it was very difficult for what you would say squatters, people who basically just inhabit land, really, who has no title or deed to it. It was difficult for them to do that. So it was very difficult to own land. It was very difficult to, enhance your wealth and improve, your social well-being. So there again, because of the difficulty in England, many people, said, let's run the risk and go, across the Atlantic Ocean and reside in the New World. There again, that is a social reason for as well. Escape bad marriages, jail terms, and impoverished conditions. There again, jails were crowded, prisons were crowded. So, with the necessary clearance from England, the individual could be dismissed as far as, his confinement, and could be allowed to board the ship and come to the New World. So there are myriads of reasons as to why that people came to the New World. Now, please remember, all of this is being funded by England. There are joint stock companies, all right, who are investing, in these excursions and explorations. okay? England is not stupid here. Go to the New World, by all means. Go to the New World. You're a property of us. You're a product of us. So if you go to the New World, you are our energy. You are our eyeballs. You know, you are engaging in experiments for us, okay, based on what you find. So, of course, England is not saying, please don't leave. You know, they're encouraging this, and they've got joint stock companies funding these voyages, okay? So you got to look at it that way when it comes to England and their association with the Puritan and the Pilgrim setting sail for the New World. But you will need to know those four major reasons as to why we even have the beginning of colonial America. And in the previous notes, we talked about how that once they got here, you know, they were covenant-minded, they had a code of ethics, they had morals, they had religious fervor, and all of that is coming with them, okay, to the New World. All right, so you're going to need to know those four reasons. So as you watch this and you take notes, make sure that, you know, you write those four things down. There again, I'm not going to ask that you write, you know, verbatim, word for word, but there again, you know, you want to be as detailed as you can because, you know, there may be things associated with these notes on your test. So just keep that in mind. All right. Over the course of time from 1607 to 1730 is when the Georgia colony was established. There again, you're going to have 13 colonies. Now, these Puritans and Pilgrims, we're not going to talk long here because we've already went over this. You do need to know some of the differences and similarities of Puritan and Pilgrim. Please remember that the Puritan gave more of an emphasis to education and religion. Pilgrims put more emphasis on hard work. All right? So Puritans drove education. There again, understanding that Bible, aligning yourself to biblical principle is going to receive the blessings from God. Pilgrims, on the other hand, were more hands-on, more manual labor than education. Okay, neither right nor wrong. Okay, and that's the same way it is today. You've got some people who are going to look to an extended education after high school. Some people can go straight into work. Okay, there again, that is our cultural core. That we still see shown today. Puritans it would be safe to say, would be slightly higher on the social ladder because they did have an academic education. Puritans were led by a theocracy. Very important that you know the term theocracy. Theocracy is a form of government in which a divine ruler, a deity, okay, is running the government. Good examples of theocracies: Israel, Iran, many of these Middle Eastern countries who are driven by the Islamic faith are theocratic in form. Puritans were led by a theocracy. There again, remember, God was the divine ruler, and what his Bible said was, you know, the authority, and that was their God. Okay, remember that in Pilgrim's governance, they established what is known as a democracy. Okay, democracy is where people rule. Very important that you know that. Democracy is where people rule. Okay, there again, no authoritarian, no totalitarian. There again, democracy where people rule. Okay, so there again, they are vastly different as far as their governmental systems. Now, those are some of the differences. Some of the similarities, both look to the scriptures as a guide in their life. Both groups profess, of course, to reading, examining, and interpreting the Bible. So if you have a particular test question that asks for differences and similarities, it would be to your advantage, of course, to know those. Okay? All right, so over the course of time, I sort of jumped ahead of myself from 1607 to the 1730s. You will go to the development of these 13 colonies. So we're jumping real fast through American history here. This is not necessarily American history class. This is just sort of giving you a foundation, you know, of what is what in a quick manner. All right, so these English colonies, there again, there's 13. By the time we get here, let's say, you know, mid-1700s. Okay, Georgia would be the last colony that you see here, 1730. All right, you got 13 different colonies, you got 13 different governors. Okay, and so you got 13 different ways of doing things. One thing that you need to know about these Atlantic coast colonies here is that they are not unified, so to speak. Okay, they're very regionalized. They're very much, in competition, to be, the best colony. So unification is not necessarily, a situation at the time frame. Okay, and there again, where you are regionally, is going to vary how you view things. Okay. In the 17th century, mostly all the colonists believed the church instilled moral behavior and respect for authority and created better citizens. The governments relied on the church and protected its existence in a reciprocal relationship. As a result, each of the early English colonies established its own state-sanctioned church. The middle colonies that you see here on the right comprise of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, however, did not establish state-sanctioned religions. So it is safe to say that the middle colonies were not as strict as far as a particular religion. Now, most of these colonies say that only Christianity can be allowed, especially in your Massachusetts Bay Colony that you see right here. There again, if you're not practicing Puritanism, you're not allowed. You're going to be exiled. You're going to be disregarded. Matter of fact, colonies like Maryland that you see here in Rhode Island were established under, religious tolerance content. They became a colony because they wanted to break away from those northern-based colonies who were very strict, Puritans. So that is the reason why that these colonies developed. And there again, there is no state-sanctioned religion in those middle colonies. So in refusing to do so, they opened the doors to people from a multitude of nationalities and faiths. So there again, you have what you have because of that in those middle colonies. So just remember, the middle colonies, as far as from a religious perspective, is very diverse. From a economic perspective, they are a huge provider to these colonies because there again, they did trade with one another, and the middle colonies, because of their soil, because of their climate, was referred to as the breadbasket. Okay, these colonies that you see here in green, they were the breadbasket. They were pretty ample as far as wheat production was concerned. So that's just a little bit of information about the middle colonies. The southern colonies included Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. These colonies also boasted plenty of good cleared land, mild climate, conducive to growing staple and exotic cash crops. Many plantations. A plantation is a farm basically consisting of one single crop. Most cash crops or most plantations, in the southern colonies consisted of tobacco. Rice was the majority as far as just the colonial period. Once we start extending a little more west, we will see cotton production. But in the colonial period, it was either tobacco, or if the climate or soil was not good, they would grow rice in the low country of South Carolina. Indigo dye was used to dye textiles blue. So southern colonies also would produce lumber, tar, pitch, turpentine, furs, and of course cattle. The southern colonies did implement what is known as indentured servitude. There again, you would perform much of the labor during the early years of colonization. Indentured servitude is the concept where people are going to work for a particular acreage of land, or a rite of passage, so to speak. What happened with indentured servitude is it created a class conflict, especially in the colony of Virginia. The Tidewater elites against the backcountry people in this area, there again started to have conflict and a class struggle, which created what is known as Bacon's Rebellion. The backwater group, the frontiersmen, they nominated Nathaniel Bacon as sort of their leader, and they engage in what is known as a rebellion. So eventually the class conflict is going to bring an end to indentured servitude, and by 1619 we would introduce African slaves. They would replace the indentured servant as a result of that, and they would be used on larger plantations. It's kind of interesting that the colony of Georgia would be really, when they first started, was not in favor of slavery, because James Oglethorpe wanted a colony that would, be self-motivated and self-driven. So it's just kind of an interesting note there. But nevertheless, that is sort of the characteristics of the southern colonies from a work perspective. And then there again, from a religious perspective, mainly Protestantism as well. Eventually you're going to have your Baptist, you're going to have your Methodist show up in your southern colonies as time progresses. Your northern colonies included New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, whereas Southerners lived in a relatively isolation from one another. Northern colonial life revolved around townships. Villages formed around the church. Central green area was usually created, often called the commons, where important business and community activities took place. So much of the work in the northern colonies, there again, because the north was stony, sloped, and heavily forested, and people in the north couldn't sustain huge plantations as the southern neighbors could. Families farmed small plots. They would help perhaps one or two servants or slaves. Additionally, the weather was too cold and harsh to support large-scale market crops, so as a result, northern farmers mainly grew crops for their own consumption, referred to as subsistence farming. Barley, oats, wheat are mainly grown. The colonists also raised cattle, pig, and sheep. A lot of northerners were fishermen, loggers. You did have skilled artisans that migrated to the northern colonies, developing industry that ultimately created a foundation for future manufacturing. Okay, so there were a lot of water sources as well for the construction of mills to process grain, textiles, and lumber. The northern climate was free of mosquitoes, so northerners enjoyed longer lives, usually living well into their 60s as compared with their southern counterparts. Okay, so that's just, there again, a little bit of information here as far as these colonies are concerned. So they're vastly different. 13 different colonies, 13 different ways of doing things. And as time progressed, England is going to be expecting more and more of these colonies, and they're going to start to feel more and more oppression. So even though that they're different colonies, one thing that they do have in common is that they receive oppression from England. Okay, so it is going to force these colonies to start to think about banding together when we start to edge closer and closer to the mid-1700s and the end of the 1700s, where we are in an American war of independence. Okay, so there again, over the course of time, these colonies will establish things to be able to continental congresses, Albany plans of union, during the American Revolution, and it is going to help these colonies, establish a form of togetherness. All right, so, when you are in a situation of war, you have no other choice but to unite. And of course, that's what these colonies, over the course of time, had to do. Okay, but remember, these colonies, of course, from 1607 to your middle 1700s were vastly different. Okay, so just keep that in mind. By the 1750s, the American colonists, feeling more unified by such intellectual currents as the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening, had developed a unique culture of their own. Although the individual colonies developed distinctive religious, social, and demographic characteristics, they all shared a basic sense of unity that grew stronger through the coming years of economic and political upheaval. Okay, so the more that these colonies became unified, the more that the English tried to, what you would say, put their thumb on these colonies. Now, they're going to make sure that they have the say-so, and these 13 colonies are going to be categorized by 3 different types of colonies. Of the 13 colonies, you're either going to be a charter colony, you're going to be a royal colony, or you're going to be a proprietary colony. The charter colony was issued by the king, which allowed colonists to govern themselves to a great extent. Now, this is, you're going to have the most freedom, okay? There was only a handful of colonies that had a charter colony, basically a written document seeking permission from the king so that they could govern themselves to a great extent. Okay, so if you were fortunate enough to live in one of those colonies, you're going to you're going to fare pretty well for the most part, because you're not going to have as much English rule over you. The majority of these colonies were royal colonies, governed directly by the king through an appointed governor. All right, our governor works for who in today's time? The governor works for you and me, the people. If he doesn't do a good job working for the people, what happens to him? He's voted out. All right, so the people here really don't have a particular governor that feels as if he is working for them. Okay, so the governor here is not about meeting the interest of the people. That's his whole purpose. Okay, when Ronald Reagan became president of the United States, he set a common photograph of American people at his desk to remind him every single day that he worked for the people. The governor on a state scale does the same thing. He works for the people. Okay, but the royal governor here, he worked for the king. So he doesn't have the interest of the people, he has the interest of the king. All right, leading these people to feel more and more oppressed. Okay, proprietary colonies founded by individuals or groups to which the king had granted ownership of the land. So basically the colony would be fragmented up, let's say 4 or 5 regions, and 4 or 5 of the king's cronies, we say friends, would be allowed then to basically run that particular region. North Carolina is a good example of a proprietary colony in which the king there again would grant ownership to those particular proprietors. Okay, so you were one of the 3 there again, and you still had a lot of influence from England. Okay, this is going to create a lot of tension. How does it create tension? England during the mid-1700s becomes more and more oppressive and authoritative over the colonies. Second bulleted point is a must. Royal governors of the colonies would meet the demands of the king more than the colonists. So royal governors would use their power and often use or abuse the rights of the colonists. Okay, so very important that you know that. Colonists began to become worried that their rights would be done away with, as well as their opinions in government. So people are starting to become fearful that they are falling back into the concept of a tyrannical rule or an oppressive rule. The colonists are going to have to match the oppression with a form of intensity of their own. Okay, and this sort of explains the I can statement of how that tension over power and authority led to America's founding fathers to develop a constitutional republic. Okay, all right, so last one we're going to go over here is the tensions with England from, an economic perspective. All right, so already at this time here, as we move forward in the timeline of American history, the colonists are very frustrated, because from a political perspective, they can't do as they want to do because the governor is meeting the demands of the king and not the people. So they're feeling oppressed politically. All right, well, this note here is going to show out that they feel oppressed economically. Okay, mercantilism. Under the mercantile system, power and wealth went hand in hand. In other words, the leader of the mercantilist countries with larger import and export operation believed that the power derived from a full national treasury. So to acquire and keep gold and silver, the mercantilist power had to limit foreign imports and preserve a favorable balance of trade. To do this, England, France, Spain, Portugal, and Netherlands, they would encourage their domestic manufacturers to produce as many goods as possible, develop and protect their own shipping industry, acquire colonies to provide raw materials, and sold finished manufactured goods to the colonists. Okay, so let me show you this as far as case in point. Let's say, for example, the northeastern part of the colonies at this time had a lot of forestry. Let's say that particular item was logged in the northeast. Those logs would be sent to England here, okay? Once they were sent to England, Englanders then would take the raw material of the log and they would create their furniture. They then would take the furniture and force the colonists to buy back that furniture. So all they wanted from the colonies was the raw material. They then would take the raw material back, finish the product, and force the colonists to buy that finished product. So England always had a buyer, okay? That is the way mercantilism works. So under mercantilism, great powers needed to acquire colonies to produce that raw material, such as grain, sugar, rice, timber, and tobacco. Each colony has provided the mother country with an exclusive market for its manufactured goods. So even the colonists can't even have a sense of freedom when it comes to their economy. Okay, so they really don't like that too much. All of these kinds of oppressions are increasing the tension that the colonists have towards England. So you definitely need to know the working capacity of mercantilism. And there again, we've covered a lot of time in history, 1607 to now, let's say 1750s and 1760s would be where we are right here at this slide here. All right, England is becoming more and more oppressive, and the colonies are taking it less and less and becoming more and more agitated. So now what is to take place in the next lecture is the colonies stepping up and showing their element of defiance towards the mother country. And eventually this would lead to an American Revolutionary War, and then would lead to the development of what we cover in American Civics as a set of written laws that we would hope to create, a lasting country. So we stop here, and we will pick up on the next lecture here and the conclusion of 1.1 notes. Have a good day.